and welcome back to the Turning 30 podcast, a place where we talk about what it's really like to turn 30. I'm your host, life coach Emma Wilson, and I'm here to help you feel better, get unstuck, and be more confident in your 30s. I am so excited to release this week's episode. It's on a topic that I truly believe isn't spoken about enough, and the guest is so knowledgeable, and I know that you're going to take so much away from this episode. But before I talk about what the episode is about and I introduce this week's guest, I just want to give you a little update. I just got back from an incredible 11-day trip to Japan. 9 of those days I was traveling with Vacay Crew Travel, who are a company that organize luxury travel for those aged 25 to 45. And it's mostly solo travel. So most people that go on the trip come alone. So very, very aligned with my business and aligned with me and what I like to do. And they invited me along to Japan to experience a trip firsthand. And it was honestly amazing. So for those of you that follow me over on Instagram at Turning 30 Coach, you may have seen some of the things that I've been getting up to for the past couple of weeks. But I honestly have to say, and don't get me wrong, Japan is wow, incredible, and Tokyo, amazing. I had such an amazing time. The best food, shopping paradise. Really couldn't recommend it anymore for a travel destination. But I think more than anything, the main reflection of my trip is how fun and refreshing and, just different from my everyday life it was to join a group of people who I never met before and to go on an adventure with them and to have an experience with them. I was the only Brit, which was quite interesting, amongst 7 Americans. It was me plus 6 others. And I sometimes struggle with social anxiety, and before I was going to meet the group, I was already checked into my hotel room and we were meeting downstairs. I started to feel a bit nervous, thinking like, oh my gosh, how is it going to be? I'm spending, 9 days with these people, and I did not have anything to worry about. They were all just honestly hilarious. We had such a laugh together. It was so much fun. And after the trip, and when we were saying our goodbyes and I was in transit on the way home, I was just thinking how important it is to really make new friends at this age and to meet new people and to have new experiences and to do things different to your usual life and your usual friend group. And that's really why I'm so passionate about running the Turning 30 retreat this summer. I am running it with my co-host Yelena, and there are still spots left. So I just wanted to invite you all, if you're looking to have a new experience and, to go on a new adventure and meet a new group of people, then these 4 days are going to be really transformational. And that's not even discussing all the other things that we're going to do, the amazing journey you're going to go on back into alignment with all the activities that Yelena and I have planned. So I just wanted to come on before the episode and remind you to check the retreat out, and just to tell you that those 11 days in Japan were just, like I said before, so refreshing and just fun. It was just really simple, amazing time to be with others. And now I've got all new contacts. They all live in the States, which I look forward to connecting with them when I'm next over on that side of the world. So yes, I really, really enjoyed Japan, and I encourage any of you who are looking to join a travel crew and to, if you want to solo travel, but you don't want to necessarily do a big city like Tokyo alone, and obviously Japan is extremely difficult to organize things, then head over to their website and you can use the voucher code that I'll actually put in the show description notes. So you can go over there and get a discount for being part of this Turning 30 community. Now for this week's episode. In this week's episode, we're going to be talking again about money. So for those of you who are avid podcast listeners, you will know that I've done a couple of episodes with Ellie Austin Williams talking about money and how it is to be in our 30s and have financial expectations and all the different topics around that. And when I released the last episode, which was around 2 months ago now, I had such interesting conversations and interesting dialogue with many of my community on my Instagram page. And what I realized from those conversations was that this is a really hot topic. And this is a topic that so many of you want to know more about. And investments and investing is a topic that is so often aimed at men and aimed at people who are in the corporate world or who have access to a lot of money and who are very privileged. And I really wanted to invite Anna, this week's guest, on to talk about how as women we can be more knowledgeable about investing, and we can, spread that information and talk about this topic really openly. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. So let me introduce the guest. So the guest is Dr. Anna Emily, and she is the founder of She's So Money. She's So Money is a financial literacy and investing education company aimed specifically at women. She helps women learn how to keep, manage, and grow their money and reach financial freedom more quickly and without the overwhelm. Welcome, Anna, to this week's podcast. Hey, Anna, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited for this conversation. As you know, because I've reached out to you before in the past, finances, financial planning, investing, all this topic is such a big one and such a foreign concept to so many people. And I know a lot of my audience are interested in understanding about this, this topic and this industry. So I'm really happy to have you here, and I have so many good questions. But before we even dive into the more practical stuff, I would just love to hear from you your story into getting into this topic and this niche and to helping women with it. How did you come to it?
Yeah, so my business that I have now, what I do now, is 100% tied to my own experience. About 9 years ago now, so around 2014, I started my first ever business. And I was studying full time. So it was really just a side hustle because I was broke, basically. And long story short, it went really well, really quick. So my income just grew and grew and grew and grew, and this business just took off, which was amazing. And I went from earning next to nothing to earning more than 5 figures a month. And probably, like most people that experience that level of income growth in such a short time, because that was in the space of about 18 months, I just spent all the money. But I was living my best life. I was traveling all the time, buying all the designer things, flying business class. I got a really, really amazing car. I got an apartment in my dream building. I just upgraded my life in all the ways, and I was loving it. Don't get me wrong, because I used to struggle with money. So to then go into a space where I didn't have to worry about that anymore was amazing. And a few years into that business, around 2019, I started to feel like, actually 2017, it was not really what I wanted to do anymore. But also my income suddenly plummeted through no kind of fault of my own. It was a kind of, I was in network marketing, so it was to do with the company that I was with. And it was just a really weird time because I had all these financial commitments, but my income was dropping really quickly. And I was also thinking, I don't really want to do this anymore. So that was the first kind of point in my life where I started to realize that I didn't really have very much to show for all the money I'd made. Basically, I was panicking about money, which just felt really ridiculous because I'd been earning, really good income. And over the next few years, I basically decided to get my shit together with money. Mm-hmm. And I slowly started to learn what I could about personal finance. And I ended up saving 100,000, which was this huge milestone. And just the process of doing that changed a lot for me. And I built amazing habits doing that. But I also realized at that point that there still must be more to the story, because I remember locking some money away in a kind of high interest savings account with a bank for 2 years, and when it got returned to me, I put £10,000 in UK pounds, and I think I got £100 back after 2 years. And so I thought, wait a minute. And basically I realized I'd been talking about financial freedom from the day I started my first business. That's all I talked about. I want financial freedom. And I actually did not understand how to get it. I was doing everything wrong. I was just spending my money. I felt like I was, quote, rich, when in reality I wasn't, because I was still tied very closely to my income to maintain my lifestyle. And that's when I discovered investing. And I guess, like most women, I was familiar with property, say investment properties, but I had never, I mean, I knew what the stock market was, but that was about it. And I was in my early 30s, so I had no pension, which is the UK equivalent of, like 401k or superannuation, depending where you live. So nothing set aside for retirement. And the whole time that I'd been earning good money, not a single person had said to me, make sure that you're, investing it, are you, and so it was just this journey of like, oh my God, there's this whole world of investing, which we actually have to partake in to even be able to retire comfortably, is the bare minimum. And then to actually be financially free, we have to invest. That's the basis of it. And I just had no idea. And I thought the stock market especially was this terrifying gambling casino kind of thing, which it isn't at all. So yeah, and then I think it was just this, realization that we don't talk about it, especially as women. It's incredibly male dominated. And I just couldn't believe that, no one had told me this, and how important it is, like possibly one of the most important things you'll ever do in your life, to be honest. So I just didn't want other women to make the same mistake, which is what led me to start She's So Money. So
yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And I feel like there's so much to unpack in the story. I have so many questions about it. And I just love the fact that this all happened as you were turning 30, right? The business and all that growth that you had. And then this, like you said, the circumstances changing, and then you going from having a lot to having a little. And then this discovery of investing and everything was literally as you were turning 30 and in your early 30s. And from what I understand now, and maybe you can just kind of update the audience who haven't, I follow you on Instagram. I know we're in touch, but lots of people, you're new to them, and you can kind of do that after what you're doing now, and how learning how to invest, and I guess completely switching your money mindset, which we'll speak about a little bit more. How has that now changed your life? What's going on for you now?
Well, saving 100k was like the first foundational piece, I think, that had this really, really big impact for me, especially in terms of mindset and how important it was to not avoid my finances. But I think, it's changed my life in so many ways. Firstly, I have complete clarity and I guess a sense of peace around money that I never used to have, because I feel very confident about what exactly I actually have to do with my money to be financially free. And I'm very clear, not just from, up until I learned about investing and I want to say the numbers behind it, but I don't want people to think, oh shit, because I know people are scared of numbers. So it's actually not that complicated. But now I know like numbers, and I have exact goals to work toward. For example, I know how much I need to invest every month into the stock market to reach my goals. Then I just feel this sense of control. Like I have my own plan to retire early as a multimillionaire. Whereas before it was just, oh yeah, I want to be financially free. And in my head, that just meant being rich, or, having enough money to have the experiences or the things that I wanted. And I didn't really understand how you actually leverage money to create a day of freedom where you don't have to work anymore. So it's definitely given me that. And I did a post recently about the best thing that saving 100K gave me was the ability to fall apart. Because between about 2017, I mean, really, the first half of my 30s, to be completely honest, I was not in a good place mentally. And I was in a pretty dark space for, well, really up until maybe about a year ago. So there was several times where I didn't actually work. I mean, I eventually took almost a year away from doing any kind of income generating work. And I would not have been able to do that if I didn't have savings. And when during COVID, I was able to fly back to the UK because I actually live in Australia normally. And I had broken up with my fiance. And so because it was COVID, the flight prices were highly inflated. So it's about 7,000 UK pounds for a return flight. Yeah. And I was able to pay that in full out of my savings. And I could see, because I was in loads of Facebook groups of people that were either stuck in the UK or they were stuck in Australia, and they could not afford, they didn't have the money on hand to go and see their family. And so I just felt very grateful in that moment that I could fly back and be with my, a lot of people would say that was a lot of money, but, for me to be with my loved ones while I was just in a really shit place, basically, emotionally, was worth the money.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we could do a whole podcast really on that question, but
no, I think it just to reflect back, it is just that peace of mind and that security and that knowing that if things go wrong, that you do have, something to fall back on, which I do want to say, like, it is something that I think as single women in our 30s, it is a big factor to consider. And I can also say that, getting out of a big relationship at that age, when I was 33, finances is something that can often keep people in a relationship for longer, or not even necessarily the finances, but just that fear of being alone and having to support yourself and being, not having that partnership or that person to fall back on. It is something that I know a lot of women struggle with. So I think that's a really, a very big point, actually, is to say that it just provides you with that, almost that independence that a lot of the time people struggle to think about when it comes to finances.
Yes, couldn't agree more. I mean, women being able to, there's a lot of education and resources and things and conversations out there about women making more money, and that's amazing. However, there's considerably less about actually holding on to that money and growing it in a way that's going to support you and protect you and give you the life you want. And really, that is the key piece. I mean, if you want to be wealthy, or even if you just want to retire comfortably and be safe and protected, you need to be able to do that. And I've heard way too many stories for my liking of women who have been trapped in toxic or abusive relationships because they didn't have the financial resources to leave. So on top of all the million reasons why it's so important for women to have their own money and hold on to it, that is definitely high up there for sure.
Yeah, and I think that it's something very obvious, but I am still going to say it out loud, and I guess we can open that conversation, is why is it so male dominated, the stock market and investing and all these things? Like, I'm sure it's societal conditioning and it's from our parents and our parents' generations, but I can honestly say that it's, and I don't have it's not a huge part of my life, but my male friends are way more in touch with investing and finances and taking control of money than my female friends. And it's funny because earlier last week, I met up with a close friend of mine who was visiting, and she was talking about how she invests in the stock markets. And it really dawned on me. I was like, wow, you're my only female friend that is either saying this out loud or that does that. And I think it really just shone a light on me of how, firstly, the taboo of speaking about money in general, which I think, again, it is very British as well, but also, in most of our worlds, people don't like to share about money. And the second thing of being that investing just feels so much less accessible for women. What do you think
Mm.
about that?
Oh, where to start? So I want to start by saying that we have to realize that for our generation, we are and I'm going to say millennials here, millennial women, we are the first generation of women ever to have this opportunity.
Mhm.
So I speak with so many women, and their initial kind of energy around it, or the words that they use are things like, oh, I'm just really bad with money, or they apologize. Actually, the number one, they did a study on this, and the number one word that a woman uses with a financial advisor is I'm sorry.
Wow.
So the thing is, how on earth are we meant to even know any of this? So women are saying, oh, I'm bad with money, I'm sorry. It's like, we are literally the first generation of women ever to be able to invest in the stock market like we can, and really ever to have the opportunities we have to build our own wealth, because we didn't used to be able to own property because we were the property. And this wasn't, something that was like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This was our mums and our grandmothers' generation. So I really want everyone to feel that in their cells, because, we have this expectation on ourselves, like we should, quote, know this, but we've inherited all this generational trauma. And, as women, we've been told for generations and generations and generations that we are not capable enough to handle our own money. So that our mothers will have probably passed that down to us, whether that was consciously or not consciously, but they didn't know any different. And, our grandmothers certainly didn't. So I think it's so important for us to remember that.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
yeah.
I just want to say as well, like, I think that we forget how recent it is. And maybe you know the
Mm.
statistics, I don't know them off by heart, but like it wasn't that long ago that women weren't even allowed to purchase property in their own name or open a bank account without their husband's signature. And I know it's different in different countries, but I think that we forget it. And what you're saying is actually so interesting, how we need to remember that it's not been that accessible to us. And I think, something that came up for me is that for a lot of women, it's like, oh, well, it's not that interesting to me, Like I'm more interested in clothes and, I don't know. For me, it's like finances and sitting and like doing my finances feels like it's not interesting. Whereas for a lot of men, they love it, right? They actually follow the stocks. And I could even say that my partner, like he's really into like following and watching YouTube videos about the stock market, and he invests and all this stuff. And for me, it's like, that's boring. It doesn't feel like I want to do it. It just feels like, okay, maybe I should, but it's not of interest to me. And I think that we need to forgive ourselves, because why would it be of interest to us when it's like the same way that men aren't promoted beauty products and anti-wrinkle creams and, clothes. No one is promoting to me to go and be interested in the stock market. It's those gender stereotype marketing isn't coming to me. So there's something about that it's like, yeah, it makes sense. If my generations above me also aren't feeding me and telling me, okay, you should go and be good with money, plus society isn't advertising and promoting to me that money should be something as a woman I should be interested in, then it does make sense why for me I would rather go shopping online than go and check the stock market.
Yeah, exactly. All of that. And we have so many barriers up against us as women that, to be frankly honest, it's depressing if I was going to give you all the stats. But we earn less when we're in a job, which is why I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurship for women, because at least we have more chance of leveling the playing field. There's a huge wealth gap between men and women. I mean, because we have only recently had the opportunity to own assets, like property or stocks. And there's massive societal conditioning. But it's like, it's the same reason as, okay, like, why are there less women engineers? It's because girls are told from very young, we're conditioned in very particular ways. And, there's tons of studies about this. Actually, the owner of Starling Bank is a woman, and she's done a lot of research into this, that all of the articles, or like the majority of articles aimed at women when it comes to money, is, how do you save more money? And we're told that we're frivolous spenders, and the way that we're going to get ahead with our money is to stop spending so much, which is why we're all riddled with guilt every time we spend money. Whereas men are told like to invest. And it's a very valid point that how many more women, would we have? And also, finance as a world isn't, like you said, incredibly male dominated, and we all know that when you work in a male dominated industry, you have to put up with a lot of sexism and abuse, and it's a really, work in the finance industry is incredibly tough for a woman. Like, hopefully it's starting to change, but there's all these barriers that would indicate why someone, shuts down. And also, we don't like to do things that feel hard or that we feel we're not competent at.
Yeah.
So if you have more of a fixed mindset around it, or you feel like, really helpless, or it makes you feel stupid or dumb or things like that, then you're not going to want to spend time doing it, because it's like, oh, I can't get this, like I don't want to get my head around it. So I think that, yeah, it's a very valid point. And also, there's also studies to show that women are actually better investors than men. On average, we get better returns. And that's because we actually are, well, it's because we're less likely to kind of play around in the stock market, and we're less likely to treat it like a game, which is what men tend to do. And women are also told over and over again that we don't like to take on risk. And that is also not true. We just lack education around the, things like investing. And I think when women really understand what it is and what it can do for you, and they're fully informed, then, and don't get me wrong, actually, solid stock market investing is boring in so many ways. But you don't have to, do like the kind of things that your boyfriend's doing, where you're on, the apps all the time and you're looking at charts, and like, you actually don't have to do any of that to be successful in the stock market. You can spend very little time per month doing it, or you might find out that you're a massive nerd like me. And when I found it, I was like, oh my God, I want to learn all the things, and I love it. So
yeah, wow. I'm just so happy we're having this conversation, because, myself, and I'm sure so many people listening, will just feel a sense of relief in a way, and not feeling alone, that we have the guilt mindset and the lack of competence. Because when we put it like this and we really dive into this topic like we have, I think it makes sense. Like, everything that we're saying hopefully will resonate with people, and then almost give people permission to say, okay, even though up until now I felt like I feel guilty about spending and feel frivolous, or I feel almost like something that comes up for me, to share, is that I feel like there's such a barrier to entry with investing. And then it feels like almost like it's too big. The world is, it's too much information. So maybe I think we can move on the conversation to more practical things of what to do. Let's just give an example. Let's say you are inspired by this conversation, you feel like you do want to start investing, or you do want to even start educating yourself about investing for the point that you'll be ready to do that. Where do you start? And maybe you can share your own journey of where you started.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I always say, definitely start with educating yourself, basically. So I think what I did was I started following people on Instagram. And the next step that I actually took was to do a course. I took a course on the stock market for women. And the woman that I did it with, I think I was just so like, wow, there's like hardly anyone talking about this. So, when I found her, I like latched on, because obviously, a lot of finance educators, stock market educators are men. There's more and more women now, which is good, because, I think it's important for us to learn from someone that we can relate to on some level. But yeah, I educate educate, start listening to podcasts, start following educators on Instagram. If it's something that really, really intimidates you, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, but she'll probably never listen to this, but my sister is my ultimate project because she literally goes into a meltdown over this kind of thing. Her whole nervous system shuts down. She will cry. And she has this extreme reaction to it. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners can relate. Maybe even this podcast is making them feel a bit like, oh God. So she's my ultimate project in terms of taking her to a space where she feels she can start to manage her finances and understand investing. And I find if you start just following people, when you're just on Instagram or listen to podcasts that are, more bite-sized, you're just slowly integrating the information. Don't put any pressure on yourself like, oh, I need to learn this right now. If you're in your 30s, you still have plenty and plenty of time to learn this and get started and all the things. So I don't want anyone to feel like that sense of being under pressure, but I think that's kind of what I did. And it's slowly, I'd start to kind of pick up ideas and, a lot of learning about the stock market in particular, you will need to kind of go over things a few times for them to click and really get it. So that's kind of what I did. And then when I felt ready, I took a course, which kind of, because there's so much information out there, if you look for it, it can be overwhelming, which is why I have my program too, because I kind of, it's that way of condensing all of the information and, you want to know like what's relevant and what's not, and what do you need to know and what you don't need to know. So, but actually, to be perfectly honest, after I took the course, it took me a full year before I had the courage to actually invest. So I say start that journey of just slowly starting to familiarize yourself with it now, because, for some people it can take much longer, and there's lots of different reasons for that. Like some people have financial trauma, and some people have experienced a reality where they have had no money. And so if you've kind of grown up believing that the stock market is this place where it's like gambling, or you could lose all of your money, neither of which are true, then you're going to feel a lot more scared, to put your money in, because you're thinking, oh God, I'm going to lose all my money, and because you've had that trauma from the past. And I think with investing, it's really, really important for you to educate yourself, because what I notice a lot with, especially the American educators, is it's very easy for people to want to know, like, oh, what do I invest in? Like, people just want you to give them the answers, right? Like, and I get it. I totally get it. They want you to say, put your money in this, this, and this. However, the problem with that is you don't really understand where you're putting your money, and you don't really understand why you're putting your money there. And that is really, really important. And the only way that you can actually have someone tell you exactly where to invest is to have a financial advisor. And I have nothing against financial advisors, but if you go into that relationship completely not knowing anything about the stock market, you put yourself in a very, very vulnerable situation. And unless you have an excellent, super trustworthy, transparent advisor, which I think is probably more on the rare side, then again, you're just coming from a disempowered place. Another way that you can, and I guess I'm giving you an annoying answer, because I know people want like do this and do this and do this, but it really is that education point, because one of the like more practical steps that you can do is download what's called a micro investing app, and these differ for where you are, but if you Google best micro investing apps in my country, then it'll bring up loads of options for you. And what these do is they allow you to start investing for very, very little. So you can invest £1 a week if you want to. What they allow you to do is buy what's known as a fractional share, which is like a tiny bit of a whole share. So that means that you can, put in very, very small amount. I do find even, when people are doing this, they're still just like buying blindly. So they're like, oh, I bought this and I don't really know what it is. However, it can be a really good step, because when you're on the platform and you're looking at all the things that you have, the options that you have, it's then going to prompt better questions from you in your education. So you're going to say, oh, I've found this thing that I can invest in. I'm going to go and research what it means and things like that. And a lot of these micro investing apps allow you to invest in set portfolios. So they use what's known as robo advisors. So when you download them, they're going to ask you some questions and they will basically suggest a portfolio for you. And typically it's based on low, medium, or high risk. You choose. They will tell you, we think you should have this one, and then they're pre-made for you. So again, you can start putting a bit of money into those and start to familiarize yourself with like the terminology and be like, oh, I want to know more about this or what this means. Again, I know I've had conversations with women that have said, oh, I chose a low risk portfolio because I kind of freaked out. Again, it's so important to understand what risk, your risk tolerance in the stock market means, because it doesn't mean, if you're someone who's scared to throw yourself out of a plane like me. I mean, in life, I'd say I have quite a low risk tolerance. Like you wouldn't find me bungee jumping or things like this. But in the stock market, I invest in what's known as high risk investments because I understand why I do that and I understand what risk means. So I hope this is all making sense, but it's kind of like that. The micro investing apps can be good to like prompt some better questions from you and to like direct your research, I guess, and your education in a particular way until you really, really start to get your head around it. And then the next stage would be basically, feeling more confident investing higher amounts, which you need to do, and knowing like, yes, I'm putting my money here. And I think that there is a lot. I had this conversation with someone recently. There's a lot to be said for, as women, we really need to take radical responsibility for our finances, and I have this conversation with my clients all the time because I'm not a financial advisor. So I have to be, I'm limited in what I can say. And at first I felt like that was, a hindrance, but actually it's like, I want women to say, yes, I invested in this stock or this thing, this fund, because I understood what it was and I did the research and I thought, yes, this suits me. And sure, run it past people, absolutely, but owning that decision and not feeling like you need someone to like guarantee things for you, because there is risk in investing, but you can limit that risk. And I think when you really understand the trade-off that you're making when you're not investing your money, it just puts a different light on it. So sorry if that was an annoying.
No, it's not annoying. I think there's so much good pills of wisdom there, really practical steps, especially about the education, doing a course, the micro investing, assessing risk, all those things. I know that you just touched upon this and we've been speaking about it almost since the start of the podcast, but what about money mindset? Because for me, I feel as a coach, I have to ask, like certainly so much of those practical steps that you want to do are going to be hindered, or somebody is going to experience resistance if you do struggle with what so many of us struggle with because of our upbringing, because of, like you mentioned before, money traumas that we've experienced in the past, and that fear, that really strong anxiety that can come from the fear of losing money or not being with, of not having money in the first place. How much is money mindset a big factor here for doing all of these things? And do you work with money mindset with clients? And if yes, how can we start to work on the more, emotional aspects of money?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it's everything. It underpins everything. And yes, I do work on clients with this because, like you said, if I could teach you everything about investing and you will still not do it if emotionally and mentally, like, and everything's behind it. So yeah, 100% is so important. I think that the best weapons against this, like the best tools, is really understanding that when it comes to kind of, holding, growing, keeping your money, like money management or knowing what to do with your money, investing, things like this. What I was saying earlier about it's honestly not your fault, because we are the first generation of women to even be able to do this. You've got everything against you, chances are your parents never spoke to you about this kind of thing, or if they did, they probably planted some not great ideas in your head. Like, it's very, very, very rare for someone to be brought up where there's a positive money mindset influence and accurate factual information about investing. So, you may have heard like, investing's only for rich people, which, to be fair, another thing to remember is between my mum's generation and my generation, the world has changed so fucking much. The fact that I literally got up this morning, went on an app and invested in 5 seconds, that's absolutely unheard of. Like, not only could my mum probably not invest because she didn't have her own money, she was a housewife, but it did used to be true that you would have to go down to a financial advisor and you would have to give probably a minimum of like 10, 20, 30,000, maybe even 100, because another thing with a financial advisor is most of them these days will not work with you unless you have at least 100 grand to invest. And that's not necessarily because they're being, elitist, but it just costs a lot to be a financial advisor. It's very expensive because they're so regulated. They need, because they take a percentage of that, right? So they need someone with money to even like pay their own bills. So these things, some of these things used to be true. Now you can start investing for £1 or $1, and you can do it on an app in 3 minutes. So, what your parents taught you is probably wrong, I'm going to say. And even my dad, who taught me some things about money, like, you should save, 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 save. But when I started this business and started talking about this, he still hates it, and we've had numerous conversations where he said X, Y, Z. And now I understand the stock market. I've been able to say, actually, you're wrong. Whereas I used to think everything he said is gospel. So I think it's knowing that your parents, they might have done the best they could, but chances are, they've instilled some pretty, like, some fears or some not great, beliefs. And knowing that, being open and having that growth mindset of like what you believe might not be true, and knowing that you can change your beliefs, and being open to the fact that you might misunderstand things, or you might have got the stock market wrong, or just being open to the fact that maybe you are capable of managing and your own money and building wealth and understanding this whole money thing. And I have had a new client recently, and she's in her 30s, so she's about the same age as me. And she said that her whole family, like, she's like the running joke in her family because she's so bad with money. And she's always like, she actually grew up in a house where her parents are very generous and they gave her what she wanted. So when she was like 18, she went out and she just thought she could just have what she wanted. So she got into loads of debt. So understanding your money story is really, really important, and understanding that it was really given to you, but now you can take control of it. Like, everything you absorbed, all your beliefs about money and investing and managing your money and debt, like most people are so, oh no, we need to talk about this before we run out of time about buying a house, right?
Yeah.
So many people are obsessed with buying a house, okay? And I'm not saying you shouldn't buy a house, right? At all. But the numbers show that, and I believe this, and if you speak to a lot of personal finance experts, they'll say the same. Your home, if you buy a house that you're going to live in for the rest of your life, or for the next 20 years, and then maybe you'll sell it and get a bigger house, whatever, is not an investment. And chances are it will actually cost you money over the long run. And people are so quick, like, I want to get a house and I want to get this mortgage that you're going to spend the rest of your life paying off. And it's because it's an emotionally rooted decision. It's emotionally rooted because people have been taught, buy your first home, get a mortgage. Like, isn't that what we're
Yeah.
all taught, right?
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought this up. And I think me and you have spoken about this before, like on a message or something about, I think I posted something about not owning property and you replied saying, yeah, I'm so happy I don't own a property. And we were like, we need to talk about this because it's not spoken about enough.
Yeah.
And it's something that really dawned on me, people are so scared to get into debt, right? It's like an aversion. Like we're taught, don't live in your overdraft, don't get into debt. Like it's such a big thing.
Yeah.
But we're also at
Yeah.
the same time taught, as soon as you have any extra money, save it and it's for a house deposit. And then get a big mortgage.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's debt. We don't see it as debt because we call it a mortgage. We don't understand that when people are buying property, they're going into ginormous debt. And there's something here about, maybe you can answer, why are people so obsessed with buying property and so scared of investing in investment funds and stocks and things like this? It's wild when you think about it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Basically, so I remember having this conversation with one of my mentors, and when you make a decision about money, right, there's two ways. You can either make it from purely logical, numbers-based decision, right? So, for example, if you have debt and one amount of debt has a higher interest rate, the logical numbers-based decision would be that you would pay off the debt with the highest interest rate. Or we make it from emotion, which is what most of us are doing. Like, we're making decisions based out of emotion. So historically, from a numbers logic based standpoint, the stock market has outperformed property. So if you were someone who'd rented over the past 30 to 40 years, but you invested in the stock market, you'd be better off than someone who'd invested in property.
Wow.
So
that is crazy to think about that and say that out loud, how we're, as a society, so obsessed with property that we're almost missing a trick.
Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that that'll happen over the next 30, 40 years, but that's what's been the trend so far. The other thing, I mean, there's so much to this. I mean, obviously, like I mentioned, it's just drilled into us. And for, the longest time, the only way to really build wealth, was in property, right? The stock market is actually a relatively new thing. So, there's that kind of like human thing that, to have your own home, it's an emotional thing. People feel secure. They're way, way more familiar with property because everyone knows what property is, right? It's your home. So you can touch it, you can feel it. But people aren't familiar with the stock market. And so it's scary to them. And there's so many myths about the stock market. And what happens is there's so many myths and so much misunderstanding about the stock market. And then you weigh that against so many positive myths about property. And so much like, imagine the way that I say it is like the stock market has the worst PR agent ever. And property has the best spin doctor ever. Because the other thing is with the stock market, it's like its whole little universe. And that's another reason I think people are so intimidated by it, is because if you go and turn on like CNBC or Yahoo Finance or whatever, you'll see it's like stock market's up, it's down, it's up, it's down, it's crashing, it's and so people are like, what the hell? When you buy shares, every day you will see the price of that share, like what it's worth, and it'll go up a little bit or down a little bit every day. And if you had the price of your house on a big billboard in front of your house, people would be just as scared of investing in property, because your value of your house would go up and down every day, probably a lot more than the stock market.
Wow.
But we only know how much did I pay for it and how much did I sell it for. And people really like to lie to themselves about things. So with property, so someone will say to you, oh, I bought this property for 100 grand 30 years ago and I sold it for 175. So I made 75,000 equity. But that's probably completely incorrect and wrong, because basically when you buy a property and you own it for 20, 30 years, you are going to, have to pay like so many costs associated with it. Like maybe you have to have a new roof or things go wrong and you're paying generally for that upkeep, right? And with inflation and things like that, if someone actually tracked accurately what they spent on their own home over those years that they owned it, chances are that they would have lost money. But we just have this, oh, I bought it for this and I sold it for this. And so I made money. But like, you probably didn't. Also, what most people do, and this is why I believe your primary home is not an investment in terms of like a wealth building asset. It's an emotional investment, sure, because you might feel once you've paid your mortgage off, like secure because you have a house that no one can take away from you and you can live in, right? Which I think where a lot of the emotion comes from. But let's say you do sell your house and get 75k. Where's that 75k going to go? Straight into the next house.
Yeah.
So that money's always really tied up in, it's like, we obviously both rent. When I rent somewhere, I put a deposit down, and then was a deposit, you know what I mean, like a bond. That bond isn't my money. I'm never going to see that bond ever again, like, because it's always just going to go to the next rental property.
It's so true. It's so true.
So there's just, it is such an important conversation because property might not be, one of my mentors, she actually bought a property, and this is another way to think about it. She bought a property that was much cheaper, because another thing is people think, oh, I'm going to go buy a house and it's my house I want to live in, right? So I want it to be in this nice neighborhood and like near the schools or like whatever. And so it's a lot more expensive. What she did was she bought a house in a much less expensive neighborhood, and she rents that house out. And she actually rents where she lived, because she was living in like a multi-million-dollar apartment on Bondi Beach in Sydney. So she bought the property for diversification purposes, which is, not, with your, I call it a wealth ecosystem, where you're feeding your financial freedom and you're investing in what we call appreciating assets, which is essentially, if you want the simple formula for wealth, invest in appreciating assets. So from a diversification point of view, she had investment property, but she didn't buy the home she lived in because she said, I can rent a multi-million-dollar house that I could never buy right now. So yeah, I think people, they just have, there's so many other options for you. And also for me, for example, I was going to buy property in the UK, but then I moved to Australia, where I can't actually buy property until I get permanent residency. But for me, it's never been like, I realized it actually wasn't the right choice for me. And the only reason I was going to do it was because I was told I should do it. And also, you need a huge fucking deposit. And the problem with that is someone might spend 5-10 years saving up for their dream home deposit. And all that time, you're losing out on compound interest, because to get involved in the stock market, for example, you can take like £100 and start getting invested. There's no, and again, I mean, I'm saying this, I want to just like say, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling people the stock market is the best option for them. But the way that I see it is like, the stock market is not going to call me up tomorrow and say that my roof broke, you need to pay me £10,000. The stock market doesn't have tenants. I never have to there's zero landlord things involved. So I think it is just opening up that conversation, educating yourself, and knowing there's also this obsession with paying down your mortgage. If you do have a mortgage, there's a really good calculator you can use online that shows what would happen with your money if you actually just paid your mortgage, the minimum, and then you took the rest of your overflow of money and you put it into the stock market. And again, if you'd done that over the last kind of 30-40 years, you'd be much richer because you're making money and you're not, paying down all this debt. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, wow.
It's such a rabbit hole, really.
No, I feel like we could do a whole episode on it. And I recently did a podcast with another, she's not a financial advisor, a financial thought leader called Ellie, she does this, her handle is The Skill Talks Money. And she also was saying it is about education, and it's also about understanding what works for you. For some people, they want that security of having a physical house to live in, and that works for them. And for some people, I guess, which is more what me and you resonate with, is like, we want to travel the world and we have different priorities in a way. And so for us, maybe maybe buying a property isn't the be all and end all. But I do think that it is about really educating yourself and understanding what works for you and just knowing that there are other options out there. Now, I have a question for you. It sounds a bit silly, but I want to talk about it before we finish. Is that you mentioned that you saved $100,000, right? Yes, this was the kind of that big financial landmark or milestone for you. Is that money tied up in the stocks? When you say you saved 100,000, is that money that's like accessible to you, or it's tied up?
So when I first hit that goal, it was all cash. So what I have a program where the core focus is saving your first 100K. And when I kind of reflected on it, for most women, and this is my own personal experience, as I was in the process of saving it, I was learning about investing and I was getting more comfortable with it and, you know, things like that. So with the 100K, what happened was I saved it in cash and then I deployed it into, so yes, now some of it is in the stock market, some of it's in savings, some of it's tied in my company. So I kind of got to that point where I had the money, but I'd been spending that time learning about investing, learning about the options available to me, because with money, everything is a trade-off. And like, you know, we've been saying, it really is education and knowing all the options available to you. Because, you know, someone might, and everyone has a different opinion. And I think this is why it's so important that you have your own education so you can make your own decisions, because otherwise you are, you know, there's a lot of people out there that are going to say this is the right thing to do with your money, this is what you should do. Like, I mean, I read an article the other day that was saying that entrepreneurs shouldn't bother investing in the stock market because they should just put all of their money into their business, because that will be the biggest return on investment. I mean, to me, that's crazy. From a, you know, diversifying your wealth and where your money is really important for lowering risk. Like if you put all your money in one business, then, you know, I think anyone could see that is like a highly risky thing to do. But, you know, you might decide that you don't want to use your house deposit for a house anymore. You actually want to invest in a startup, or, you know, you want to invest in gold or the stock market, or like it's knowing what's out there. But yeah, mine, it was originally in cash. And then I felt confident enough to say, this is where I'm going to deploy this money. So, you know, some of it's an emergency fund, some of it's in my, like, you know, liquid cash for my companies, some of it's in the stock market, some of it is actually for a property deposit, but an investment, because I want to get into buying property for Airbnb. That's part of my retirement plan. Yeah, but great question.
Yeah, because I don't remember where I read it. Potentially it was in your content, because I follow you, but I remember reading that before you start your first investing, you should have 6 months or 3 months worth of your own expenses covered in like a separate fund. Is that something that you recommend? Is that like, I guess the question really is that at what point of having extra money should you start investing? Should it be every extra penny, or should it be after you've saved a certain amount?
So having an emergency fund is extremely important, because when you invest in the stock market, you essentially are locking that money away. That's not to say that you couldn't get it if you wanted to. I mean, if it's in a retirement, like a government supported retirement fund, like a 401k or a pension, then you will suffer severe penalties if you try and touch that money. So if you're putting it in something like that, then you really do need to know that you're not going to touch it. If you are investing outside of that, then again, the worst thing you can do basically with investing is like pulling your money in and out of the market. You want to put it in and leave it there for as long as possible before you touch it. So the reason that people recommend having this emergency fund or living expenses put away is because if the worst happens or something happens to your income streams, you don't want to be basically pulling out money from your investments. You don't want to be there. How much you have, this 3 to 6 months is extremely generic. For me, I think you've got to think about your personal circumstances. If you're a single mum with zero social support, you've got one job that is, you know, on shaky ground, then you're someone who's going to maybe want 6, maybe even 9 or 12 months of expenses because you're responsible for another human. Your income stream is not very, secure, and you don't have anyone that you could rely on. So someone like that is going to need a lot, a much bigger emergency fund. For someone like me, for example, I'm very, very, very blessed. So, I mean, my emergency fund is probably way bigger than it needs to be, but I am someone who I only really have like one, well, I have a few income streams, but one like active income stream, which is my business. And that's why I do have like a pretty decent personal emergency fund. And I also encourage any business owners to have a business emergency fund. So I have good reserves because that's just me. However, I have incredible social support. I have parents who would look after me if the worst happened. I have friends that would look after me, and I could turn up at their houses and I could sleep on their sofa. I am very well educated. It wouldn't take me long to get a job if I needed. I'm not responsible for anyone else. I have no pets, no children. So for me, I can play it a bit more close to the bone because, and like I said, there's always a trade-off. Or that money that's sat in a savings account for an emergency fund is basically like losing value, really. It's not doing anything apart from giving you that peace of mind, which is really important. So you've got to decide for you what helps you sleep at night, basically. Yeah.
Well, I feel like we should do a whole separate episode because I feel like I can just talk forever. I have so many questions, but I guess I wanted to ask you one last question. So for anybody who is listening to this and is having heart palpitations and getting sweaty palms because they literally live paycheck to paycheck and they don't know anything about money, let's not go down that route of education, but the person who is listening and thinks that it feels so far away to save 100K and to have different income streams, how can they, apart from education, how can they approach this now? Like, what do you think is the first thing that somebody who's listening to this and feels really panicked can do to start this long road of saving, or this long road of building this wealth that is available and accessible? What would you say?
Yeah. So such a good question. It's a difficult one as well. I think I'm going to answer this question as if I'm speaking to a woman in the Western world that has opportunities, because it's always a difficult question when we're talking about people that are struggling with money or they're living paycheck to paycheck, because there's a lot of reasons why they might be stuck in that cycle. And I'm very aware of saying like, oh, just make more money, like is not that simple for a lot of women. So I want to just say that disclaimer. So I'm going to answer the question as in to a woman who does have the opportunities. I think you've got to really ask yourself what you want. If you're stuck living paycheck to paycheck and you don't want that life for yourself, because ultimately, if we're being, like brutally honest about wealth creation and financial freedom, and that really, to me, that means being able to basically live off your passive income. That's the definition for me, is creating this passive income ecosystem, whether it's living off your investments or whatever, so you don't have to work anymore. And so when you're living paycheck to paycheck, you don't have the money left over. Do you know what? Even I think there's a lot of women living paycheck to paycheck. Some women who are on six figures are living paycheck to paycheck. So I think you first of all got to ask yourself, like, is this are you barely able to pay your bills, or is it you're just spending everything that's coming in? And actually what you need to do is, first of all, have a look at how you're managing your money. Because, like I said, speaking to a woman in the Western world that has all the opportunities available to her, chances are that with some tweaks around your money management and your spending, you would have the money left over to start saving. So I think there's that is start by looking at how you're spending your money, and you can do that by going over your last 3 months of expenses and really kind of being kind of brutally honest about where your money's going. And I always teach value aligned spending and mindful spending. So make sure you're spending money on things that really are of value to you, and also spending on things like taking a minute before you spend, basically. Like that's what mindful spending is. When I always say to my clients, because when they come on board, obviously we often have this conversation of, struggling to save, avoiding managing your money, things like this. If you want to, you can change. You can stop living paycheck to paycheck. You can learn how to manage your money. I think there's that belief thing that I want to say, first of all, like you are more than capable, even if you've made, choices in the past that weren't the best. I have a lot of clients that are like, oh, I got into loads of debt. And so now I just feel like I'm bad with money, or I don't trust myself with my money. But, these are decisions that you can learn from and heal from
Yeah.
and move forward from.
So I think it really is just all about, I mean, there's so many different layers to it, but I think something really key here that you're saying is just believing that it can change and believing that you have the power to
Yeah.
take control of it, which so many of us
Yeah.
don't have. We don't believe
Yeah.
that. But once we start with believing that it's possible,
Yeah.
then that's where the change can start.
Yeah. I'd say, like, take that responsibility for, if you want to get out of this situation and you want to build wealth and you want to build security, then it's taking responsibility for that, and saying, like, I can do this and I can make the changes. But, know you can do that, forgive yourself, that small, but just have that basis, of like belief in yourself that you can do it.
I love that, and such a great way to end the episode. Thank you for being such a fountain of knowledge and sharing so many, good things with the listeners. Where can the listeners find you and go and learn more about your content and your courses, and just connect with you and your community?
Yeah, of course. The best place is Instagram. So the handle is she's_so money. And I also have a podcast as well, which is She's So Money. So that's a good place to start.
Amazing. Well, thank you again so much. And I will see everyone on the podcast next week.